What you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about Jay Leno. For years, he made millions laugh every night. But behind that iconic smile was a life marked by poverty, near-death accidents, and heartbreaking loss. Now, at 75, he faces the greatest battle of his life. He survived flames that scarred his body and falls that broke his bones, but Jay Leno has finally met an enemy he cannot conquer. A shocking diagnosis has forced the ultimate goodbye, leaving fans and friends in disbelief. What unseen catastrophe could possibly break the will of the most resilient man in show business? Is this truly the final curtain for Jay Leno? The making of a legend, Jay Leno's early struggles and triumphs. Life has a way of carving its deepest wounds long before the world even knows your name. Few stories illustrate this as sharply as Jay Leno's. Born on April 28, 1950 in New Rochelle, New York, Jay entered a world that seemed at every turn determined to break him before he even had a chance to rise. Poverty wasn't just a circumstance, it was a constant presence. The walls of his home were thin, the floors creaked, and the chill of winter seeped through every corner, biting at fingertips and toes alike. His father, Angelo, worked grueling hours as an insurance salesman. Each day he left the house before dawn and returned long after dusk, muscles aching, mind exhausted, barely able to converse with his family. There was little time, little energy, and little patience left for tenderness. Yet his discipline, his relentless work ethic, planted seeds that Jay would carry for a lifetime. His mother, Catherine, a gentle and kind Scottish immigrant, tried to soften the harsh edges of their reality. She cooked, cleaned, and comforted, doing her best to fill a home that had little to offer in material comfort. She read stories, nurtured imagination, and tried to shield Jay from the relentless pressures of a life marked by scarcity. Money was scarce. Meals were simple, sometimes repetitive, stretched to last the week. Clothes were handed down or mended repeatedly. The small joys most children take for granted, a new toy, a warm coat, a school trip, were often luxuries beyond reach. Yet despite these hardships, Jay's parents gave him something far more valuable than money. A belief that perseverance could shape destiny, that effort mattered more than circumstance. From an early age, Jay sensed the world could be unforgiving. He witnessed neighbors struggling, families burdened, and opportunities that seemed to favor those already privileged. And yet, amid the cold winters, the modest dinners, and the silent exhaustion of his parents, Jay began learning a lesson that would guide him forever. Adversity could be a teacher, not a sentence. Even as a young boy, he found ways to cope, to carve out spaces of joy in a world that demanded resilience. He mimicked teachers to make friends laugh. He invented stories and jokes to lift spirits during moments of gloom. In many ways, his sense of humor and keen observation of human behavior were born not from talent alone, but from a desperate need to survive the emotional weight of his childhood. These early years, filled with both struggle and quiet courage, were the crucible in which Jay Leno's character was forged. The foundation of his life, the grit, the determination, the relentless pursuit of better days, was laid here in a small, drafty home where love, though modest in its resources, burned with unyielding intensity. The cruelest words. When the family moved to Andover, Massachusetts, young Jay faced a battle that would define him. While other children breezed through their lessons, Jay stared at letters that wouldn't stay still. Words twisted into confusion. Pages became enemies. He had dyslexia, and in those days, schools didn't understand it. Teachers didn't see a child desperately trying to learn. They saw a boy who couldn't keep up. Then came the moment that scarred him forever. A school guidance counselor looked at his mother and said 5 words that could have destroyed any child's future. Education isn't for everybody. Think about that. An adult in a position of authority telling a struggling child that he simply wasn't meant to succeed. But here's what saved Jay Leno: laughter. School was very difficult, Jay later admitted, but making people laugh got me through it. Comedy wasn't born from talent. It was born from survival. While other kids played sports, Jay learned to imitate teachers, to crack jokes, to use humor as a shield against a world that had already decided he was destined for less. In that small house with peeling paint and thin walls, Jay learned to stitch a smile over the ache inside him. His mother nurtured his imagination. His father taught him that effort, pure, relentless effort, could outrun any expectation. Every failing grade became fuel. Every dismissive glance became determination. What America would someday celebrate as confidence was forged in these fragile, painful beginnings. Surviving the streets. At 18, Jay walked away from Andover High School carrying nothing but a fragile dream. Emerson College in Boston was next, where he studied speech therapy, a sensible path that everyone approved of except him. What truly burned inside him was comedy. But Boston in the late 1960s was merciless to a young man with no money and no connections. Jay took every job he could find, delivering pizzas through winds that cut like knives, hauling heavy engine parts in freezing auto shops, scrubbing his hands raw at a car dealership where his lifelong love of machines was born. These weren't stepping stones. They were survival. Every paycheck vanished instantly. Rent, gas, meals so cheap he sometimes skipped them just to make the week stretch. And when even that failed, he slept in his car. Picture this, an aging, rattling vehicle that shook in the winter wind, frost creeping across the windshield, his breath turning to fog, fingers so cold he had to tuck them under his arms for warmth that never truly came. He wasn't officially homeless, but life hovered 1 inch from the edge. By 1973, at just 23 and still a student, Jay opened a tiny comedy club. It was barely a venue, cramped room, mismatched chairs, a microphone that crackled. But it was his. Between managing the club, dragging himself through classes, and working multiple jobs, he began performing at open mics across Boston. In smoky basements and flickering neon bars, Jay discovered the cruel truth of show business. Talent alone couldn't save you. Some nights, only a handful of people came. Other nights, the silence after a joke felt heavier than any insult. Club owners dismissed him. "You don't have the spark. You're just ordinary." One freezing night, after waiting hours for a chance to perform, a club owner shut the door in his face. "We're not wasting stage time tonight." The door slammed. The cold bit deeper. And for a moment, Jay wondered if the world had been right all along, if he really wasn't meant for more. His life became a blur of borrowed couches, worn jackets, coins counted carefully, late-night bus rides, and 3-minute stage slots that often led nowhere. But that stubborn ember inside him, forged in the loneliness of his boyhood, refused to go out. The breakthrough. After years in the darkness, something finally shifted. In 1977, Jay stepped onto the Tonight Show stage beside Johnny Carson for the first time. The lights were harsh, the pressure unbearable. Yet when Jay opened his mouth, the room eased. Carson's eyes warmed. The audience laughed. A life that once included sleeping in a freezing car had just brushed against destiny. Through the 1980s, Jay lived like a man possessed. Airports at dawn, highways at midnight, comedy clubs that reeked of spilled beer. When Carson named him permanent guest host in 1986, the world saw triumph. Jay saw a tightrope. Then came 1992. Jay became host of The Tonight Show. He was 42, carrying decades of discipline carved into him by hardship. His routine became legendary, arriving at 9 a.m., reading newspapers until the ink stained his fingers, rewriting jokes until they were perfect, rehearsing until he could feel the rhythm in his bones. When taping ended, Jay would drive across Los Angeles to perform stand-up for small crowds. He believed laughter wasn't something you guessed. It was something you earned. He was never late, never canceled. And slowly, he built something extraordinary. More than 5 million people tuned in each night. NBC earned billions. At his peak, Jay made $30 million a year, then cut it in half so his staff wouldn't lose their jobs. But nobody saw the man alone at 1 a.m., a half-finished cup of coffee beside him, discarded joke pages scattered on the floor as the building hummed into silence. For 22 years, he closed America's nights with warmth. It cost him sleep, peace, and pieces of himself. But Jay gave it freely because he never forgot the young man who once felt invisible. And he vowed no one watching would feel that way. The late-night wars. Then came the storms that nearly destroyed him. In 1992, when NBC chose Jay over David Letterman to succeed Johnny Carson, America fractured. Letterman was brilliant, beloved, and many believed he was Carson's natural heir. The press turned it into a war. Fans took sides. And Jay, a man who just wanted to make people laugh, became the reluctant villain of a story he never wrote. Even as he worked tirelessly, every joke was measured against Carson's legacy, every gesture compared to Letterman's style, every headline questioning whether he belonged at all. For someone once told he wasn't fit for education, the echoes cut deep. The storm quieted. Viewers warmed to Jay's sincerity. The Tonight Show thrived. But in 2004, NBC reopened old wounds. The network announced, 5 years early, that Jay would hand the show to Conan O'Brien in 2009. Jay accepted it with grace, though privately he carried a weight he couldn't voice. One day, he'd walk away from everything he'd built. In 2009, the transition happened. Jay stepped aside. Conan stepped in. But ratings faltered. Executives panicked. NBC offered Jay a 10 p.m. show, then proposed shifting Conan's Tonight Show to a later hour. What followed wasn't a disagreement. It was an earthquake. Headlines erupted. Fans waged battles online. Somehow Jay, whose only ambition was to stay out of trouble, became the villain in a narrative he hadn't written. Night after night, he walked past newsstands with caricatures of himself twisted into roles he'd never played. In his dressing room, under cold fluorescent lights, he sat alone reading accusations he didn't know how to answer. "I'm just an employee," he said quietly, the words carrying the exhaustion of a man caught between corporate machinery and public fury. He never lashed out at Conan, never blamed NBC. He simply stayed silent, hoping the chaos might pass. When Jay returned to The Tonight Show in 2010, it wasn't triumph he carried, it was weight. Some welcomed him home. Others remained conflicted. And Jay learned a painful truth. Some wounds applause can't mend. When he said goodbye for the final time in 2014, the tears in his eyes didn't belong to a victor. They belonged to a survivor. From Inferno to Spotlight, Jay Leno's fight through fire. Fame had tested him, but what came next was beyond anything Hollywood could throw at him. On a quiet November afternoon in 2022, while repairing a 1907 steam car in his garage, Jay's world turned into hell in an instant. A clogged fuel line ruptured. Gasoline drenched him. Before he could move, a spark leaped into the air and his entire world became fire. Flames erupted across his face, neck, chest, and hands with a ferocity that seemed almost alive. Sound collapsed into a rushing roar. Vision narrowed to smoke and orange light. He stumbled backward, trying to smother the flames with his hands. The pain surged through every nerve. The heat was everywhere, suffocating, inescapable. When the flames finally died, he stood trembling, the smell of scorched fabric clinging to him. His skin throbbed, and beneath the pain was something colder, the terror of not knowing how much of himself had been taken. At the burn unit, doctors moved quickly around him. Words like significant burns, treatment, and possible grafts floated past him in careful tones. When he saw his reflection, face wrapped in protective dressing, only his eyes visible, he realized something had been irrevocably altered. He endured grafts, hours in a hyperbaric chamber, nights when his face tightened and sleep felt impossible, nights when flames flickered behind his closed eyes. And yet 9 days later he returned to the stage. His hands still trembled. His face still carried the tightness of healing skin. But he stood there anyway, offering laughter to a world that had no idea how close he'd come to losing everything. The motorcycle crash. 2 months later, fate struck again. On January 17, 2023, Jay rode a vintage motorcycle, his left hand still cautious from the grafts. Without warning, a nearly invisible cable snapped across his path. The impact hit like a steel whip. He was thrown from the bike with such force that instinct and pain collided in a split second. His collarbone shattered, 2 ribs fractured, both kneecaps cracked with a sickening finality. As he lay there, cold seeping into his bones, a deeper pain tightened around him. A body still raw from fire was now breaking in new places. Every breath burned, every movement stabbed. For a man in his 70s, these injuries steal independence, mobility, the smallest pieces of everyday life. Yet even in braces, even struggling with each step, Jay returned to performing. That stubborn fire, the one that kept him alive in freezing cars, through rejection, through humiliation, rose again. The fall. By late 2024, Jay was still recovering from burns and fractures. Then came his harshest blow yet. On a gray autumn afternoon near Pittsburgh, one misstep on rain-loosened earth sent him tumbling down a steep 60-foot slope. His wrist struck a jagged rock with a crack that echoed through the valley. His shoulders slammed against the ground. A fingernail ripped free under the violence of the fall. When he came to rest at the bottom, the sky looked distant, as if the world had pulled away. He lay still, not by choice, but because his body wouldn't obey. His breath was knocked out. His vision flickered. His right eye swelled quickly. Beneath the pain was a truth. A 75-year-old body that had been burned, broken, and battered couldn't keep taking these hits unscathed. Yet Jay Leno pushed himself upright with his uninjured hand. Gritting through shock, he climbed back up that hill, inch by brutal inch. Doctors confirmed a fractured wrist, deep facial bruising, a torn fingernail, and contusions. But Jay met the news with the same steadiness he'd carried his whole life. And even then, aching, bruised, hurting, he returned to his commitments with that same gentle smile. Love in the face of loss. Jay and Mavis's journey. Some love stories arrive like spring breezes. Others burst like fireworks. And then there are the rare ones, the quiet ones that glow like a warm light in a dark hallway. Jay and Mavis's love is the rarest kind. They met in the early 1970s at the Comedy Store. Jay was a struggling comedian in a wrinkled jacket. Mavis was a sharp young activist watching from a back table. Their eyes met with recognition, a quiet certainty that whispered, "I belong with this person." Jay was poor then, painfully poor. But Mavis didn't love him for what he could offer. She loved him for who he was. Over decades, as Jay's career grew, the shape of their love changed. Late-night tapings and tours pulled him away. There were nights when Mavis sat alone at the kitchen table, listening for his key in the door. They chose not to have children. Mavis didn't wish to be a mother, and Jay simply said yes. As time passed, holidays grew quiet. No extra chair was needed. The only footsteps in the house were their own. Neither spoke of it, but both felt it. And as illness crept in, that missing son or daughter, someone who could say, "Dad, I've got this," became a silent absence. Then came early 2024. It started small. Mavis misplacing things, forgetting what day it was, losing the thread of stories. Jay tried to laugh it off, but he saw the uncertainty in her eyes, the way they sometimes hovered before settling on his face, as if needing an extra heartbeat to remember who he was. When she nearly fell, Jay rushed to steady her, his own injured knee screaming in pain. She clung to his arm, trusting him completely, unaware that the body holding her up was breaking too. Then came the words that changed everything. Advanced dementia. Jay didn't cry in that examination room. He simply reached for her hand and whispered that he would take care of her. On the drive home, she turned to him. "Where are we going?" He answered. Minutes later, she asked again. Same words, same confusion. Something inside him cracked, not with the snap of bone, but with the slow, silent breaking of a man losing the person he loves piece by piece. Now, Jay is her guardian. He signed legal documents with a shaking hand. He works with attorneys on a future he doesn't want to imagine, one where he might not be there to protect her. He buttons her blouse with fingers still stiff from grafts. He steadies her downstairs while his own knee protests. When she panics because the hallway seems unfamiliar, he wraps his arms around her, feeling his healing ribs protest, and whispers, "It's okay. I'm right here." Some evenings he plays old Tonight Show tapes. Mavis watches the younger Jay on screen and laughs. He's funny. Jay turns away from the screen toward her and answers, "He tried his best." Sometimes she slides her hand over his, her heart still recognizing his touch. Other nights, she studies his face with confusion. "Have we met?" And he swallows the ache and replies with a soft smile, "Yes, sweetheart. We've known each other a very long time." There are no children to help, no daughter to take the night shift, no son to lift the weight. Just the two of them, as it was in the beginning, but now walking through fading memory instead of rising youth. He sorts her medications despite his stiff fingers. He sits by her bed at night, watching her sleep, trying to memorize what time is determined to steal. Some days they walk slowly through the garden, both unsteady, both in pain. But they walk together, hand in hand, two aging silhouettes held upright by a promise made when they were young. In those quiet hours, Jay learned the lesson no stage could teach. Love is not proven when life is sweet. It's proven when bodies hurt and memories fade, and the easiest thing would be to step back, but you lean in instead. A nation may remember Jay Leno for his jokes, but only one woman truly knew his heart, and she is slowly forgetting. He spent a lifetime making America remember him. Now all he wants is for the woman he loves to remember his name, even if only for one more morning. And if one day she no longer does, he will still sit beside her, still lace his fingers through hers, still whisper, "It's me. I'm right here." Because real love doesn't require memory. It requires presence, patience, devotion. The cancer years. If there's a chapter written in tears, it's the nearly 10 consecutive years when Jay lost 3 pillars of his family, all to cancer. Cancer first took his mother, Catherine, after years of quiet battle. She never let him see her fear. She hid her pain beneath sweaters that smelled of lavender and the warmth of a kitchen that always felt like home. Jay remembered rough nights when she'd be waiting, tapping on a chipped plate, whispering, "You're getting better. Keep going." Even when her own strength wavered, she stitched his worn jackets and tucked encouraging notes in his pockets. Once, when he failed an exam, she told him, "Some people read books, Jay. You read people." Losing her felt like losing the compass that pointed him toward every dream. Barely a year later, cancer returned for his father, Angelo, the steady backbone who taught him everything about work, discipline, and finishing what you start. Jay visited every day, smoothing blankets, lifting water to his lips, steadying the bed. Their conversations grew shorter as the illness advanced, but their silences grew fuller. One night, Angelo closed his eyes mid-sentence. Jay began to rise, thinking he'd fallen asleep. But his father reached out. "Don't go yet." Jay sat back down, taking his father's hand, holding on as if that touch could stop time. When Angelo passed, Jay walked into the family home and listened to the echo stretch across a room with 2 empty chairs instead of 1. 8 years later, cancer came for the last. His older brother, Patrick. Patrick had been fighting quietly for years, shielding Jay from worry the same way he once shielded him from schoolyard bullies. He was the last witness to their childhood, the final link to a life before fame. When Patrick passed, Jay sat in his car in the cold evening air, forehead resting on the steering wheel. He wasn't crying. The grief was too deep. He just couldn't turn the engine on. That decade taught Jay that fame offers no shield. Success cannot slow time, and life refuses to pause even when your world shatters. Jay Leno's true legacy, beyond fame and fortune. Today, at 75, Jay Leno stands in a chapter quieter and deeper than any stage he's walked, a chapter built on endurance, generosity, and courage. His net worth sits at over $450 million, breathtaking not just for its size, but for the distance traveled. From a dyslexic boy who counted coins for gas and slept in freezing cars to one of the most successful entertainers in history. Jay famously never spent his Tonight Show salary, living solely off stand-up income, saving relentlessly, investing wisely. His properties include a Newport mansion, 2 Bel Air residences, and a sprawling Burbank compound. But the heart of his world is the garage, vast hangars holding nearly 200 vehicles spanning eras and technologies. Priceless antiques sit beside rare prototypes. Vintage race cars share space with futuristic builds. Steam-powered marvels from the early 1900s shine like relics. Each machine bears Jay's touch, a bolt tightened, a panel polished by his own hands. Yet despite his wealth, Jay lives with remarkable simplicity. He still drives himself, wakes early, works in denim shirts and old boots, bends over machinery most men of his means would never touch. He gives quietly too, millions to veterans programs, children's hospitals, burn centers, scholarships, emergency medical funds. He's funded surgeries for strangers who never learned his name. "If you have more than you need, you take care of people," he says. And he lives it. Because he and Mavis never had children, he structured a living trust ensuring her care first, then directing his fortune toward scholarships, foundations, medical research, and charities shaped by the values his parents taught him. Still, life isn't free of sorrow. Burn scars pull at his skin, repaired knees tighten, cold mornings remind him of ribs that once cracked, and every day he faces Mavis's fading memory. Yet even in this, there's tenderness. Jay cooks breakfast, steadying the pan with stiff hands. He reads to her in afternoon light. He guides her through the garden, their steps slow and uneven, whispering her name when she loses hold of it. He stays not because it's easy, but because love, real love, doesn't walk away. Perhaps this is Jay Leno's true legacy, not the fame, the cars, or the fortune, but the quiet courage of a man who never stopped moving forward. He showed us that success is built one day at a time, that love endures even as memory fades, that strength isn't loud, it's constant. Jay Leno rose from poverty to become a legend. He survived fire, fractures, and loss. He's watching his wife forget him, yet he still shows up, still smiles, still whispers, "I'm right here." That isn't just resilience. It's grace. So ask yourself, what does it truly mean to keep going when life tries to stop you? And if he can rise through this, what strength might be waiting inside you? If this story touched you, honor Jay with a like. Share it with someone who needs hope. Thank you for watching, and remember, the greatest measure of a person is not how they stand in the spotlight, but how they rise when the world tries to keep them down.